The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a movie I have always enjoyed throughout the years. Sure, it's not perfect, and I definitely wouldn't call this one of the best superhero movies out there, but when it comes down to it, it is still entertaining and a whole lot of fun. So, based off the comic book series of the same name, the story takes place in the late 19th century when a terrorist group led by the Phantom puts plans together in order to start a world war. It is up to the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen to stop him. And from there, it's a film that has some good acting, some good music, and a decent story. And the thing is, this is a very unlikely group of misfit heroes. Seeing them interact was nice, but at the same time, there was room for improvement. And sure, there are some plot holes and a lack of great character development. This movie is still worthwhile simply because just seeing all these literary characters come together in order to stop a big threat, it definitely makes for some popcorn entertainment. When it comes down to it, if you somehow haven't seen this one, then definitely check it out. And sure, while it's not a great comic book film, I still believe it is worth watching despite the issues that it does have. Now, this could have been the start of a cinematic universe featuring these literary characters, but it was the early 2000s. Cinematic universe really wasn't a thing, and the only team-up movies at the time was the first two X-Men films. But it was still cool just seeing these characters interact with each other. And sure, there's a lot of cheesy moments in this film, but I look past it because it was a different era of comic book movies. Sean Connery did a great job playing Alan. Interesting character. He's a hunter, he's an adventurer. But when he's offered to join a team of heroes, then, he ends up becoming the leader. And there's some interesting interactions between the other characters in this movie. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that is a clear reference to Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. And sure, the VHS effects haven't aged all that well, especially towards the third act. It looks pretty cheesy. Sure, this movie does have some goofy moments, but it was a different time of comic book films. Mina Harkin and Dorian Gray, two supernatural creatures that actually have some backstory between each other. One's a vampire, one's an immoral being who literally cannot be killed by normal methods. Especially considering how Dorian ended up being the double agent, that was certainly a surprise to me, because it was years ago the last time I had watched this film, so I forgot the general story. I actually like the story in this movie. It's not too over the top. It's not boring. Sure, it could be a little generic. A lot of people would say this movie's underrated. It's a movie that came out during the wrong time, in my opinion. And the reason I say that is because cinematic universe is more of a thing when the MCU came out 5 years later. So I feel like if this film had came out just a couple of years after the debut of the MCU, then certainly this movie would have been better received. Rodney Skinner as the Invisible Man was a cool character, but they legally couldn't call him that because 20th Century Fox couldn't get character rights from H.G. Wells' 1897 novel, so they really had to change his name, and they could only have called him in the movie an Invisible Man. But what I thought about the other characters, I thought Tom Sawyer, it was odd for him to be in this movie. I get why he was in the film, but it's still odd just seeing him come across these other characters. And then there's Captain Nemo, a badass character, especially in the third act. He did his thing. But as far as the villain is concerned, he was boring. He was generic. It was the simple, he wants to destroy the world. And quite frankly, I just didn't care for the character motivations because he really didn't explain of why he was really doing that. Overall, this film is not bad. I always thought it was decent. Certainly a different time when this comic book film came out. It certainly hasn't aged all that well in some aspects. But at the end of the day, this is a movie I would recommend for people to check out. It doesn't have the high octane action of the later comic book films that were released that decade and so on, but it still does have some cool action scenes, and it actually ends on a pretty sad note. But other than that, this movie does have a interesting ride from beginning to end, and despite its flaws, I still think it's watchable. I'm giving this film a 7 out of 10. You know, the thing about this movie is that despite it coming out 20 years ago, I'm surprised a sequel never happened. But there are talks of a reboot, and after watching this film once again, I am looking forward to that. And the mere fact that this was Sean Connery's last film role before he had retired, it was bittersweet considering the movie career that he had. Overall though, an exciting comic book movie, and while it's far from a perfect film, it is still worthwhile in my opinion. And that is my review of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Alright, leave your comments down below in the section and let me know what you think about this movie. Okay, this is Slim Guy 172 saying peace out.